I'm not going back to this anymore. I'm taking whatever grade I just took.
Okay. Did you improve?
Yeah, I went from 8 to 10 to 12.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. That's fantastic. See you. Enjoy your next class. And quickly do attendance. But someone wants a test? We could have a test. Well, I don't know if the next block is going to have a test. My class already had one. Oh, and they're having a test? Oh, then in that case, don't move the desks too much because they'll probably just want to move them back. Already had one, but apparently they're also having one next. So, yeah, quiz time. Quiz time. It's on all the things we haven't covered. Yeah, that's what makes it an ethics test. Yeah. Okay. We start in a minute. Ryan's here. Un and Michelle and Ella and Beatrice or B. B does not seem to be here. Eustace, T, Abby, and Ruby. Ruby. Oh, no, still none of those were the people I was looking for. Isabella, and Stella, and Angel, and Orion, and Sloan, and
Yes.
And Laurel. Where did Laurel go? Laurel was just here. There's Laurel. And Madsen.
Angela, are you kidding? I didn't get any class but the last page of questions. I didn't hit certain things that I had no idea what they were.
Two. And did they come in at the last minute? No. Oh, there we go. So we're just missing. Has anybody seen B today? No. No. I was just about to email you, your host parent, your advisor, absolutely everybody. I have only had to notify the police for missing students once. Yeah. Okay, that's done then. Okay, notebook's out. And I don't know if we actually need to watch too much more of this. Yes, there's a test previous block. And there is apparently going to be a test in the next block. So if you want to move together a little bit, that is fine. But don't adjust them too much because I'm assuming they're just going to want to move them. You could sit like right there and just like move it over.
We should screw everything up.
Make a giant circle. So we had dude from last day who was telling us about inductive arguments and why you shouldn't lie to the police. I'm not sure we need to see much more of that. What were the reasons last day? Assuming the police are good people and are not deliberately trying to get you in trouble, why should you never talk to the police? Yes, Mets. Can't help you at all? You can't use the information you tell them? Yes.
If somebody else is the president or another country president, they can say such stuff.
And they can just misremember that. That doesn't even have to be deliberate. Most people don't remember the things that they've said. Did I tell you about the bullying memory thing last day? Yeah. If you recall, there's no research on this. If you recall having a bully in elementary school and they were like really mean to you all the time, and they won't remember. People edit that out of their memories. They only remember themselves as the hero of their own story. So when you confront them as adults and you say, you were really mean to me, you're lucky, they'll say sorry, but they literally won't remember what they did. People have terrible memories.
So we all have the potential to be like bullies as a kid, but we don't remember it right now?
Yes.
So we could all be bullies and we just don't know it.
Yes. Well, there's a way to predict it apparently, though. If you go into nursing. Sorry, that's the running joke, is that if you were a bully in high school, you went into nursing.
Really?
Yes. Lawyers were for the people who argue and won't admit that they were wrong. If this was another one that was a meme for a little while, if people remembering the teacher who told them, you should probably go into debate, and realizing in retrospect they were argumentative and would never admit they were wrong, and the teacher was actually telling them that you go away. Yeah. Doctors? Kind, helpful people? I don't know. There's probably a lot of people in this room with doctors as parents. Yeah. I'm sure none of that is true. Okay. Any other reasons in terms of, because we're speaking about inductive and deductive reasoning, any other pieces from there? Why is it not helpful to talk to the police? Yeah. You might accidentally lie. Now you've given them evidence that you can't be trusted. Yeah. Remember, their entire job, like we pay them to construct an argument to find the guilty person. So they are constantly gathering evidence. And the only thing they're allowed to do is gather evidence against you. So if they gather enough evidence and it points to you, their job is to present that and have you charged. If you're trying to defend yourself, you want to keep all evidence to yourself so that they don't accidentally build a case against you. A lawyer will help make sure that everything is proposed in the right kind of way. I should probably shut down this.
Conviction. Because what they'll do, I've just turned this cop and this woman into the government's star witnesses. They'll put Officer Brooke on to testify about how my client lied to him about being in the Outer Banks, and then steroids, a controlled substance. And instead of taking the fifth, she said, no, I never took steroids when I won those Olympic gold medals. Later on, it turned out that she was lying. She worked out a deal. She pled guilty. She admitted that she was lying. And she, over her strenuous, tear-filled objection, even though she has 2 young children, was just recently sentenced to prison for 6 months. The guy who sold her the steroids, the pusher, he got only 4 months. But she got 6 months because she lied to the police and said that she did not do it. You see the problem. Michael Vick, who originally pled guilty, as you know, to these charges with respect to the operation of this dog combat sort of operation at his home. At sentencing, like many other criminal defendants, even though he eventually pled guilty at sentencing, one of the reasons his sentence was a little harder than it might have otherwise been, the judge said, was because when he initially met with the police, he lied to them and said, I didn't do anything. I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. Even guilty people, but not only guilty people, will always end up regretting talking to the police. So my advice to you, Justice Jackson was right. Any sane, competent lawyer in his right mind will always tell every client under all circumstances, I don't care if you're innocent. I don't care if it's the truth. If it's the truth, great. We'll tell the jury all about it. There'll be time enough to put our cards on the table. But before we get there, I haven't seen yet what the police got. They may have mistaken and confused witnesses who will contradict even the truthful stuff that you say. We have no way to know, no way to predict whether the information that you give them, even if truthful and reliable, will end up unwittingly dispelling our demise. So keep your mouth shut. Don't answer any questions. Let's take the fifth. You'll be glad that you did. God bless America. God bless the Bill of Rights and the geniuses who bequeathed it to us. But now, in fairness, I give equal time, or what's left of equal time, to a police officer who will explain to the extent to which, if any, he agrees or disagrees with anything I've got to say. I have no idea to know what he's going to say, but it'll be interesting. Here, let me give him the microphone. Let's give him a hand. Officer George Brooke, the Virginia Beach Police Department.
I cannot talk that fast. Not even interviewing. I'm going to take the podium here, Please. Professor. Because I took notes on some of the things you said. And everything he said was true. Okay?
I'd like to tell you about a legal case that I worked on involving a man named Steve Titus. Titus was a restaurant manager. He was 31 years old. He lived in Seattle, Washington. He was engaged to Gretchen, about to be married. She was the love of his life. And one night, the couple went out for a romantic restaurant meal. They were on their way home, and they were pulled over by a police officer. You see, Titus's car sort of resembled a car that was driven earlier in the evening by a man who raped a female hitchhiker. And Titus kind of resembled that rapist. So the police took a picture of Titus. They put it in a photo lineup. They later showed it to the victim, and she pointed to Titus's photo. She said, "That one's the closest." The police and the prosecution proceeded with a trial, and when Steve Titus was put on trial for rape, the rape victim got on the stand and said, "I'm absolutely positive that's the man." And Titus was convicted. He proclaimed his innocence. His family screamed at the jury. His fiancée collapsed on the floor sobbing, and Titus is taken away to jail. So what would you do at this point? What would you do? Well, Titus lost complete faith in the legal system, and yet he got an idea. He called up the local newspaper. He got the interest of an investigative journalist, and that journalist actually found the real rapist, a man who ultimately confessed to this rape, a man who was thought to have committed 50 rapes in that area. And when this information was given to the judge set Titus free. And really, that's where this case should have ended. It should have been over. Titus should have thought of this as a horrible year, a year of accusation and trial, but over. It didn't end that way. Titus was so bitter. He'd lost his job. He couldn't get it back. He lost his fiancée. She couldn't put up with his persistent anger. He lost his entire savings, and so he decided to file a lawsuit against the police and others whom he felt were responsible for his suffering. And that's when I really started working on this case, trying to figure out how did that victim go from that one's the closest to I'm absolutely positive that's the guy. Well, Titus was consumed with his civil case as he spent every waking moment thinking about it, and just days before he was to have his day in court, he woke up in the morning, doubled over in pain, and died of a stress-related heart attack. He was 35 years old. So I was asked to work on Titus's case because I'm a psychological scientist. I study memory. I've studied memory for decades. And if I meet somebody on an airplane, this happened on the way over to Scotland, if I meet somebody on an airplane and we ask each other, what do you do, and I say I study memory, they usually want to tell me how they have trouble remembering names, or they've got a relative who's got Alzheimer's or some kind of memory problem. But I have to tell them, I don't study when people forget. I study the opposite, when they remember things that didn't happen or remember things that were different from the way they really were. I study false memories. Unhappily, Steve Titus is not the only person to be convicted based on somebody's false memory. In one project in the United States, information has been gathered on 300 innocent people, 300 defendants who were convicted of crimes they didn't do. They spent 10, 20, 30 years in prison for these crimes, and now DNA testing has proven that they're actually innocent. And when those cases have been analyzed, 3/4 of them are due to faulty memory, faulty eyewitness memory. Well, why? Like the jurors who convicted those innocent people and the jurors who convicted Titus, many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people. I first started studying this constructive memory process in the 1970s. I did my experiments that involved showing people simulated crimes and accidents and asking them questions about what they remember. In one study, we showed people a simulated accident, and we asked people how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. And we asked other people how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. And if we asked the leading smash question, the witnesses told us the cars were going faster. And moreover, that leading smashed question caused people to be more likely to tell us that they saw broken glass in the accident scene when there wasn't any broken glass at all. In another study, we showed a simulated accident where a car went through an intersection with a stop sign, and if we asked a question that insinuated it was a yield sign, many witnesses told us they remember seeing a yield sign at the intersection, not a stop sign. And you might be thinking, well, you know, these are filmed events, they're not particularly stressful. Would the same kind of mistakes be made with a really stressful event? In a study we published just a few months ago, we have an answer to this question. Because what was unusual about this study is we arranged for people to have a very stressful experience. The subjects in the study were members of the US military who were undergoing a harrowing training exercise to teach them what it's going to be like for them if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. And as part of this training exercise, these soldiers are interrogated in an aggressive, hostile, physically abusive fashion for 30 minutes. And later on, they have to try to identify the person who conducted that interrogation. And when we feed them suggestive information that insinuates it's a different person, many of them misidentify their interrogator, often identifying someone who doesn't even remotely resemble the real interrogator. And so what these studies are showing is that when you feed people misinformation about some experience that they may have had, you can distort or contaminate or change their memory. Well, out there in the real world, misinformation is everywhere. We get misinformation not only if we're questioned in a leading way, but if we talk to other witnesses who might consciously or inadvertently feed us some erroneous information, or if we see media coverage about some event we might have experienced. All of these provide the opportunity for this kind of contamination of our memory. In the 1990s, we began to see an even more extreme kind of memory problem. Some patients were going into therapy with one problem, maybe they had depression, eating disorder, and they were coming out of therapy with a different problem. problem. Extreme memories for horrific brutalization, sometimes in satanic rituals, sometimes involving really bizarre and unusual elements. One woman came out of psychotherapy believing that she'd endured years of ritualistic abuse, where she was forced into a pregnancy and that the baby was cut from her belly. But there were no physical scars or any kind of physical evidence that could have supported her story. And when I began looking into these cases, I was wondering, where do these bizarre memories come from? And what I found is that most of these situations involved some particular form of psychotherapy. And so I asked, were some of the things going on in this psychotherapy, like the imagination exercises, or dream interpretation, or in some cases hypnosis, or in some cases exposure to false information, were these leading these patients to develop these very bizarre, unlikely memories? And I designed some experiments to try to study the processes that were being used in this psychotherapy so I could study the development of these very rich false memories. In one of the first studies we did, we used suggestion, a method inspired by the psychotherapy we saw in these cases. We used this kind of suggestion and planted a false memory that when you were a kid, 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall. You were frightened, you were crying, you were ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And we succeeded in planting this memory in the minds of about a quarter of our subjects. And you might be thinking, well, that's not particularly stressful. But we and other investigators have planted rich false memories of things that were much more unusual and much more stressful. So in a study done in Tennessee, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, you nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard. And in a study done in Canada, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, something as awful as being attacked by a vicious animal happened to you, succeeding with about half of their subjects. And in a study done in Italy, researchers planted the false memory when you were a kid, you witnessed demonic possession. I do want to add that it might seem like we are traumatizing these experimental subjects in the name of science. But our studies have gone through thorough evaluation by research ethics boards that have made the decision that the temporary discomfort that some of these subjects might experience in these studies is outweighed by the importance of this problem for understanding memory processes and the abuse of memory that is going on in some places in the world. Well, to my surprise, when I published this work and began to speak out against this particular brand of psychotherapy, it created some pretty bad problems for me. Hostilities primarily from the repressed memory therapists who felt under attack and by the patients whom they had influenced. I had sometimes armed guards at speeches that I was invited to give, people trying to drum up letter writing campaigns to get me fired. But probably the worst was I suspected that a woman was innocent of abuse that was being claimed by her grown daughter. She accused her mother of sexual abuse based on a repressed memory. And this accusing daughter had actually allowed her story to be filmed and presented in public places. I was suspicious of this story, and so I started to investigate and eventually found information that convinced me that this mother was innocent. I published an expose on the case, and a little while later, the accusing daughter filed a lawsuit. Even though I'd never mentioned her name, she sued me for defamation and invasion of privacy. And I went through nearly 5 years of dealing with this messy, unpleasant litigation. But finally, it was over, and I could really get back to my work. In the process, however, I became part of a disturbing trend in America where scientists are being sued for simply speaking out on matters of great public controversy. When I got back to my work, I asked this question. If I plant a false memory in your mind, does it have repercussions? Does it affect your later thoughts, your later behaviors? Our first study planted a false memory that you got sick as a child, eating certain foods, hard-boiled eggs, dill pickles, strawberry ice cream, and we found that once we planted this false memory, people didn't want to eat the foods as much at an outdoor picnic. The false memories aren't necessarily bad or unpleasant. If we planted a warm, fuzzy memory involving a healthy food like asparagus, we could get people to want to eat asparagus more. And so what these studies are showing is that you can plant false memories and they have repercussions that affect behavior long after the memories take hold. Well, along with this ability to plant memories and control behavior, obviously comes some important ethical issues. Like, when should we use this mind technology, and should we ever ban its use? Therapists can't ethically plant false memories in the mind of their patients, even if it would help the patient. But there's nothing to stop a parent from trying this out on their overweight or obese teenager. And when I suggested this publicly, it created outcry again. There she goes. She's advocating that parents lie to their children. Hello, Santa Claus. I mean, another way another way to think about this is, which would you rather have? A kid with obesity, diabetes, shortened lifespan, all the things that go with it, or a kid with one little extra bit of false memory? I know what I would choose for a kid of mine. But maybe my work has made me different from most people. Most people cherish their memories, know that they represent their identity, who they are, where they came from. And I appreciate that. I feel that way too. But I know from my work how much fiction is already in there. If I've learned anything from these decades of working on these problems, it's this. Just because somebody tells you something and they say it with confidence, just because they say it with lots of detail, just because they express emotion when they say it, it doesn't mean that it really happened. We can't reliably distinguish true memories from false memories. We need independent corroboration. Such a discovery has made me more tolerant of the everyday memory mistakes that my friends and family members make. Such a discovery might have saved Steve Titus, the man whose whole future was snatched away by a false memory. But meanwhile, we should all keep in mind, we do well to, that memory, like liberty, is a fragile thing.
And now we have sound. When you create a general claim that connects the premise with the conclusion to make the argument valid, if it isn't plausible, you keep recreating it until it is. Um, if you can't recreate it to make it a strong argument, it's probably not a good argument. If the generalization you're making to connect the premise to the conclusion to make it valid, to make it a deductive argument, seems sweeping and unbelievable, it's probably meant to be inductive. Now, yep. Right after the last, why didn't you tap? Tap. One second. Oh, there it works. And there it doesn't. Where's my mouse? Oh, there we go. So the last thing we would have done, I'd say, Praven, should we give this a new title? Creating deductive and inductive arguments. Not use this one because I don't want to blame anyone else, but I found out that Ms. Carroll has had her baby. And a picture has been sent to staff, which I realized I simply must show you because it's amazing. I already love this baby. And I'll shut off the picture in the live stream just because I don't want to show the picture to the entire world. But baby. And look at the baby looking extremely suspiciously at both parents. I am here. I don't know why. Who are you people? What's going on? Very judgmental baby. Doesn't. Is she? The air is bad. Bad air. What's bad about the air? It's yeah. I think it's probably okay. But anyway, yes and no. If you are feeling ill, you should not touch the baby. You should wash your hands first. The baby has multiple mechanisms. It has a developing immune system. It's not as good as even a toddler, so it does have to go through some more development. But it is receiving a lot of nutrients from the mom, assuming the baby is being fed from the mom. And that process itself gives it tons of antibodies of local diseases. because anything the mom gets exposed to makes antibodies immediately prioritize for the baby, so that it gets it with the food, and a ton of mucus. The food the baby gets from mom, the reason why it's often so rich and mucousy is because it literally contains mucus that traps pathogens and slimes them away. Yeah. Yes, I guess we shouldn't, unlike Baby Yoda, we should just say baby the whole time. Ennio. Ennio? Ennio. Ennio. Ennio Carol Caradulo. I don't know how to pronounce any of these words. And I'm going to stop doing that because I'm still being recorded in my pronunciations, even if I'm not being recorded. Okay, so imagine I have a new baby. I did once. I've owned 2 humans. Vaguely recommend it. You just have to find a 3D printer that's willing to go along with it, and boom, a couple of new babies. They're not as obedient as you might assume that something that you own is. Pardon? Yeah, but that's okay. They know this. Yeah. A 3D printer. I don't know if you know this, but half of humanity can 3D print human beings. It's amazing. Like, it is amazing. You just 3D print them. It's not, I will say, a lot has to be done with the delivery system. It is not as clean and nice as normal 3D printing. There's a lot more fluids involved.
So it's kind of more like ceramic.
Ceramic printing?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's like a printer that keeps on dipping something in a vat.
in a vat, yeah.
Ceramic liquid.
Yeah.
And you use it to like
Solidified layer?
and then you have to take it out and put it in like a curing chamber when it's all slimy, and then you have to take all like the filaments off of it, and then you like a ceramic piece.
I like that. That is a lot closer to what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Pardon? Yeah, no, that's crazy. That's crazy talk. Yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah. I'd say the whole exponential growth is so, because you start off with like a cell. That cell becomes 2 cells. Those cells become 4 cells. 4 cells become 8, 16, 32. And if you keep multiplying like that, as you know from math class, very quickly, you get, baby, millions and millions and millions and millions of cells. It's just, wow. And then you have to decide what to do with the baby. Like, do you teach it about Santa Claus? Ethical decisions. Do I deliberately lie to my baby? Yeah. Have you done biology yet in science? Well, you should know this. However, okay, many genes that are bad for you are recessive. So let's say you have, I'm going to call it R for recessive. Let's say this is the normal copy of the gene. And then lowercase for recessive. So, and that's the bad copy. It's rare, 1 out of 10 million. The thing is, every single one of you probably has 1 or 2 very rare recessive debilitating diseases. However, because it's recessive and you've got a good copy of the gene, you have no symptoms. And the odds you're going to meet someone else with the same recessive rare disease, pretty low. But there are lots and lots of extremely rare diseases. So the chances you have 1 or 2 actually fairly high. But the chances you have the same as someone else, fairly low. But if you have this, what are the odds that your brother or sister or parents have this? High. So if they are also recessive, and then you do a simple Punnett square. You did Punnett squares in biology? And for those of you who haven't, because I studied chemistry in my own science class, we have 1 in 4 chance just for this type of thing. So no recessive gene, carriers like their parents, but now you have a 25% chance as opposed to 1 out of 10 million. And so the odds that your family members have the same recessive genes that you have are quite high as opposed to the general population. In addition, I teach science 10, biology 12, but also one of my 3D printed things I own, they actually were born with a genetic disorder, which doesn't affect them very much. But it's extremely rare. It's like 1 in 80 million that Ms. Hanley would have had it. And 1 in 30 million that I have it, because I am from a German ancestry, Neufeld, and it's more prevalent in German areas, called MCAT. And so the odds of that happening were huge. But if I'm discussing my own children mating with cousins, if that was to happen, the odds of that would go up quite high. Because the genes are within the family, we don't know the genetic lineage. But someone random, it's still like a 1 in 80 million or 1 in 30 million chance that they would have the same gene. Oh, taste facts. Diabetes, I think, is a little bit more prevalent. The reason a lot of these diseases are recessive is because if you have a disease that has a dominant gene, it's more likely to be weeded out of the gene pool. Also, in many cases, being recessive is actually an advantage. In many cases, being a recessive for these genes, they actually tweak it so it works slightly better. For example, color blindness. Did you do color blindness? Yeah. So, and it's carried on the X and Y chromosomes. It's specifically carried. I'm going to use R again because capital C and small c look bad. But you have this is a male with regular vision. This is a male colorblind. This is a female colorblind. This is a female carrier. This is a female non-carrier, normal vision, fine. So if you are male and you have that gene, you are colorblind because it's not carried on the Y at all. If you're a male, you have the Y chromosome, so you only get 1 shot. So if you... Colorblind is way more common. I've diagnosed it 7 times in science class, back when we used to do color blindness. I would put up colorblind slides, and then everybody, how they say like 37, and people would shout, like, oh, it's this. And then people would realize, wait a minute, I don't see that one. And then you can get some that you can only see if you're colorblind. So that one would come up, and nobody would say anything, but like one person would go, 7! And then we go, oh, you might be a little colorblind. Yes?
My favorite thing, like in eye doctor places, trying to figure out the number on that one, because I'm not colorblind. Then I was
you can faintly make it out if you really try, yeah.
And then, so last time we went to eye doctor person ever, and so what was the results for that one? She pulled out a thing and was like, all right, 5. I'm looking for a 5, and I faintly see the 5. I'm like, oh, it's right there.
You were paying too much attention. So let's take this particular case. You have dad who has normal vision, mom who's colorblind. Hold it. What have I done? I didn't put in half of the genetics. I only put in dad. I forgot mom-ish. No, I forgot that one. There we go. I forgot that one. And I messed up on that one. That should be... All right. So in this particular case, I messed up again. Yeah. There. And there. So in this case, if you are male, in this particular pairing, you have mom who's a carrier, dad who's not colorblind. If you are a boy, you're 50% likely to be colorblind. If you're a female, there's no chance that you're colorblind. You're either a carrier or you have normal vision. Now, the reason I started this is if you're colorblind, it's a fairly, modern society, if you're colorblind, it's not going to affect you very much. You'll get irritated at some web pages, However, if you are this person, if you are female, and you have a copy of the good gene for your cones, and you have a copy of the bad gene, you can see more color than other humans. You have a superpower. That extra mutated cone, which gives, if you only have that, it gives you color blindness. But if you have it as an extra, it gives you slightly different information. Your color detection you have a finer gradient. You can tell colors apart that nobody else can.
How can you tell us apart?
There's color tests that you can do that would tell you that you have a better color sense than other people. And that is one of the ways that you could take a test to see if you're a carrier. It is impossible to be male and have that supervision. So there do exist superheroes among you that can see color better. It's not that much of a superhero ability, but you can see colors no other human can see. I am not going to do it. I stopped doing it after a few of the times because the middle of a Science 10 classroom is not the time that you want to realize that you're colorblind, having never known. I told a house captain to go check if he's colorblind because I sent him up to the store to get blue stuff for the house for orientation. He came back with blue and purple and insisted that the purple was blue. Like, it's not blue. You should go to the health center. And he found out he was colorblind. He had gone his total whole life not knowing that he was colorblind. No, they'll refer you to a doctor and you'll get a sight specialist. Yeah.
Wait, so would people ever know that they can differentiate extra colors if they never got tested?
How would you know? You would just assume that the other person who can't tell the difference isn't paying attention or just being stupid. Why are you doing that? And people who are colorblind don't know that they don't have the same color sense of every. I've talked to them where they were like, I was told that the sky is blue, and I was told the grass is green, and that is what I see. I know the sky is blue, and I know the grass is green. But if you took those colors and put them together, I can't tell them apart. But I didn't know they were different because I still saw them as different because I was told they were different. Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah. Yeah, and we would never know because we're trained to respond that the red on the rainbow Canadian flag, you see a particular thing when you see red. I don't know that you see the same red I see. Your brain might be wired so that you see my version of green when you see red, but you will always see that wavelength as that color. So we will never be able to know if what we see is the same thing that you see. Because who knows how it's wired up inside your head? That's hardware.
But I mean, if that stuff is different, like, there's like, apparently when you see the color red, like, you have like a physical response, like your heart beats faster. Would that mean that that's the response is just because of the association of red with like blood and stuff, and not like the actual color you're seeing?
It might be. We wouldn't know that. It might be wired when you see this wavelength because the color red is a conscious experience. The heart beating and everything is an unconscious experience, and it might just be your eyeballs go, that wavelength react like this. Whatever color's created in your mind space, who knows what that's based on? We'd have to like sever someone's brain, take it out, connect it to someone else's eyeballs, and then see like, does that work? And we don't have the technology yet to do that.
Do they have to be alive?
If we wanted to ask them questions, yes. Yeah. If we could do a brain transplant, and then see through other people's eyeballs, we would get some information about how the wiring works. When all of a sudden would my whole color palette change? We can't read the brain. We don't. They've done some interesting things about predicting what you're seeing based on your wavelengths, but we still don't have good. We can't read an output of a brain at all. Sorry, I'm just determining how much of that was a serious question. And I am so excited if that's serious to show you the brain. So, oh yeah, the human brain looks like that. That's your brain. It's covered in a film, and then there's fiber, like a thick fiber over your meninges. So when you get meningitis, it is the inflammation of the covering of your brain. It has the consistency of like a stiff jello, but jello. This is what a concussion is. Because if you take your finger right now, go like this with your finger, and just right at your temple, just like hit yourself in the head. No, not very much. Just like that. That creates a shock wave that goes through your skull and reverberates your brain on the other side, and actually has been shown to go through the tissue. You probably kill 3 or 4 brain cells every time you do that. You have millions of brain cells, and you are naturally pruning them all the time, so it's not that big of a deal. But you can imagine if you are hit in the head, and this is the consistency of jello, just like if you had jello in a bowl and you went like this with the bowl, what would the jello do? You go, so your brain goes bloop because your skull is hard and it can't move with it. So your brain in a concussion is literally getting squished against the opposite side of your skull and bruising. Now, if your brain is bruised and starts to swell, where can it go? Nowhere. So it's stuck inside of a case. And that's why that is incredibly dangerous. We have found surgery, ancient Egyptians, lots of cultures have independently invented the ability to cut out part of the skull to allow the brain to swell, to allow the person to survive. And then when the swelling goes back down, they have reconnected the skull and it healed. We know this because we have found it healed in people who obviously survived the surgery. It's amazing.
We still do that?
Oh, yeah. We only cut up your skull to allow brain swelling, but it is very traumatic, and often it is still difficult to do if it's, can be done in time and they diagnose it. It's you can't see that. But I know someone who went to the hospital. Their symptoms were vomiting, and they were acting confused. They had no idea what was going on. They eventually found out that what was happening is that his body just decided to produce a lot of cerebrospinal fluid. So fluid was just accumulating in his brain, and then like at the bottom of the ocean floor, squishing his brain. Yeah, they literally took a little plastic shunt, like piping, and then they stuck it in the back of his throat and connected to his spinal cord. And whenever the pressure gets up too much, it just leaks out the fluid into his throat. So the brain pressure never gets that high. So and everything was fine again. We were talking about babies before, so this is amazing. Just so you know, if you ever have to have babies, there are a lot of drugs, if you want it, that will help with the pain. One of the ways they give you this drug is they take your spine, so you have your spine that's going up, and you don't want to feel anything below, so they take a needle and they stick it into your spine, and then they freeze it. They pull it out. You don't get injured very often there. That's very well protected, so very rarely. I used to teach biology 12, and I once had to have someone come in to tell them all the different ways that birth can go right, because I scared all of Alex's house, apparently, into swearing off kids forever. So I just want to emphasize, this is rare. They put a needle in, they pulled it out. Now, in this particular person, you have to, much like you have a meninges in your head, you have a covering, a thick membrane wrapping around that to protect it. When they punctured it, put in the drug, they gave birth. When they pulled it back out, it didn't heal properly. The fluid inside your brain and spinal column is clear. Doesn't have a lot of platelets. There's no red blood cells. It's a separate fluid. So when they pulled it out, it didn't clot. You don't have a lot of clotting factors in it. So what happened is every time they'd stand up, fluid would leak out. And so the pressure in the brain would drop. Then they would instantly become nauseous, throw up, and have to lie down. But as soon as you're lying down, the pressure would go up again and they'd feel fine. But they had no idea why they're doing this. And if you've just finished being pregnant, they had like months of morning sickness that was really bad. So they just thought the morning sickness was going. But it went on for weeks. And eventually they went back to the doctor's office and they're like they couldn't even like sit up anymore because their brain fluid was literally leaking out of their body every time they stood up. So they went to the doctors, they told them, and the anesthesiologist was like, I know exactly what's going on. You know, he wasn't there. The doctors would call him. He was like, just stay right there. I'll be there. He's there in 15 minutes. Took another needle, withdrew blood, and squirted blood directly into the spinal column. That caused platelets to come out and then block both holes, and then it properly healed up, and then they were fine. But they had to know that that was happening first. It's a very rare thing, but it was adjusting the pressure that goes on inside of their brain. It encases and protects your brain and spinal column from things like movement. You can imagine if it was dry, it would be rubbing all the time, so it provides friction. Also, you have a brain blood barrier against disease. If your brain gets infected, you're really, really hooped. And so a lot of things are designed to keep it away from your brain. So you have blood vessels growing there, but you also have fluid encapsulating it to protect, because you don't want a concussion just because you turned your head. So there's got to be some give and take there. Welcome to your brain. Oh! So if we were to cut it, this is a very, not as just a diagram, so not as gross. But yeah, and you've got brain matter all the way through. It's coiled. This increases the surface area, all this coiling. So if you look at, say, a chimpanzee brain, it'll be a lot more smooth. A dog brain, mouse brain, it will have bumps, but it won't have as many coils. And it provides more surface area for the reactions. It's a way of packing more area into less space. Humans have this problem in that our main evolutionary advantage was our intelligence. But what happens if the head becomes too big? Hey, you want a smaller person, get a bigger head. Yeah. Yeah. Your pelvis only has a hole about that big, and the head has to fit through there. Now, there's a lot of different things that happen for that to happen. Number one, you've noticed that babies have soft spots. So their plates are literally sitting apart like this, and when you're born, it squishes it together, and they'll even overlap. So they squish the head, and then if you've ever shaved your head and you have a nice even head, you were probably born by cesarean section. Because you were born by cesarean section, you didn't go through the birth canal, so your head wasn't like squeezed shut. And then opened again. But if you notice, like, oh, here, I've got this weird bump on the side of my head. Yeah, your head was like this, and then it opened up again. And it didn't, go back perfectly. What's with Mr. Scarto? Why? Okay. During your pregnancy, you release a lot of hormones that loosen up the ligaments and actually makes your bones a little slightly more flexible. They don't loosen, they don't come apart, but they'll bend forwards a little bit slightly. Often, for those of you who get more of the estrogen and progesterone hormones, when you may have noticed that when you were younger, you ran more quickly. And then when you're older, you actually have to train so that you don't waddle, because your hips will relax a little bit because it's preparing for an eventual birth. So your hips are actually altered in their shape and size to adjust for the fact that you've got to fit a baby through the hole. Now, if you look at Olympic runners, all of them, their hips didn't do that. They have naturally kept the original shape, and they run very fast because it trades some inefficiency with walking with some increased chance to survive childhood. And I have heard it said by someone just very recently, and I'll get your question in a moment, was like, all this stuff with doctors for childbirth is just silly. I mean, women didn't just used to die if they had, were pregnant. And the answer to that was yes. Yes, they did. It was a very dangerous thing to do in a way. And when you have 8 children, the odds that you might have perished in one of them went up substantially. If you got a urinary tract infection 100 years ago, the odds that you probably would just endure a lot of pain, and most people would survive, but lots of people died just from something simple like a UTI. Yes, your question.
Okay, I forgot my original one, but most people who are assigned female at birth waddle slightly when they walk just because of the way.
And it's not just people who are assigned female, but if you are trans and you take the hormone blockers so that you don't develop, if you're assigned male at birth and you don't develop as a male, and then later on you take female hormones, your hips might change a little bit too. Either body will do it as long as they're exposed to the right hormones in the right time. But on average, people who are assigned female at birth will get the hormones that will adjust their hip shape a little bit in order to make it easier to give birth and not die.
But they actually waddle?
Well, I don't know how to describe it.
Your pelvis isn't like a solid bone.
Yeah.
There's a gap where your bones get really close together, and there's a ligament that holds the 2 bones together and holds the pelvis together. So if you have different hormones, the ligament gets thinner and your pelvis stretches out from the weight of the body.
How do you know that? That's awesome. Is this the most recent first aid course that was just happened? Yeah. 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 There you go. It's not 100% reliable just looking at the pelvis. If you dig up bones from ages ago, it's still, there's, as with most things, there's an overlap. Yeah. So despite everything I said about pain and needles and everything else, most people, large majorities who give birth, survive quite fine. And a lot of them, I don't know if you noticed, some of them do it more than once, which to me is always mind-blowing. You had a child, you went through that experience, I heard you screaming, and then you decided to do it again. So it can't be that bad. It can't be that bad. Oh, yeah. Traumatic memory and the inability to remember things, maybe that's the secret.
Isn't there a release during childbirth that actually makes you forget it? And you after so you do it again?
I've heard that mentioned, as in some people have suggested that. But I don't think it's at the level where they say that this is absolutely true. They say this might be true because as you just saw, there's a lot there of just people also just naturally forget a lot of stuff. There's no hormone released when you're in boot camp. But if you ever talk to someone who's been in the military for a long time, they will have cherished memories of boot camp. Nobody in boot camp has these memories. You only have them years later because you forget the bad stuff and you remember the good stuff. And giving birth usually has a pretty nice outcome. Babies are cute. And they smell amazing. They're like crack. You just, I want another one of those. Babies just smell amazing. If you've never smelled a baby before, top of its head just, it's amazing. You're like, I want more of these. Yes. Sorry. Are you okay?
About the traumatic memories, so does that mean people, when they say that people with traumatic memories, their brain blocks out what happened so that they can recover?
Yeah.
Does that mean that's not true?
If they have traumatic that blocks out so they can recover. The existence of blocked out traumatic memories is just a lot rarer than they originally thought. And the process they use to generate them generates false memories. You can forget things that were traumatic. And in fact, you're kind of supposed to. But you don't just in therapy come up with that memory. It doesn't seem to happen that way. You're more likely to create a false memory. PTSD is actually what happens when you have a traumatic memory and you can't forget it.
So our bodies are meant to forget.
Yeah. Apparently you would like people a lot less if you remembered all the bad things about them. Yeah. Yeah. But do you do that the same with your friends versus your enemies? Some people do. But like, if you encounter someone who's a store clerk who's a real jerk, and every time you go in, you're noticing you already dislike them, and you're noticing. So negativity bias is a name for a particular trend in which we remember only the negative things because we have now assigned something to that. But with your friends, there's the same bias in which you only remember the positive, good things. And you're more likely to weigh what they say positively. Memory itself is terrible. And one of the problems with negativity bias is you're not remembering all the good things that happened, the time that you went in and nothing bad happened and they were perfectly helpful. The reason why we think that there are more people on a full moon in a emergency room and it will go nuts is because emergency room attendants, doctors, everyone will swear that's what happens every full moon because they only remember it when it happened and it happened to be a full moon. But those biases are not a substitute for in terms of what we know with what's going on with memory. It's just things people do. How long have I been talking? What is today? Tuesday, 11:45. It's like we should do something. We've done like no notes.
I feel like we've learned a lot though.
Yes, that's true. And hopefully some of you will be a little more prepared when you go to give birth. Good luck. A cleaned out heart? No, you're trying to distract me.
I'm not distracted.
No. We can go back to here. And I can ask you, what is the missing premise? Mr. Neufeld has a new baby, and you can just, you're a little suspicious because I've had the baby, and I'm like, wow, like, clearly, yes.
Mr. Neufeld should not be trusted with the new baby.
Mr. Neufeld should not be.
That is.
So, just specific to me. So we've got our conclusion here, premise here. I think I made it a little too specific to me because the missing premise. So the Mr. Neufeld. At like the ends, they smell bad. But there's a certain you've had new car smell, right? Babies have a version of new car smell, and it's way better. Yeah. If new car smell gives you a headache, that's what it should be doing. Because new car smell is outgassing of all the toxic chemicals that were used to make the car. Now, what I was trying to go through here is that if you think I need it, do you think everybody who needs has a new baby needs to have child services called on them? No. If you're restricted to just me, that's a pretty weak argument. The missing premise, we're going to go through almost some and few next day. Hold it. Next day, we also had a vote for a show, given what we know about ChatGPT. Was it called Coded Bias? We might do that if people are willing.
That was a good one. That was just what I needed. We should be talking about
Oh, right, yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting to respond to your email because I got piled. You said you will take longer to hand in certain assignments?
Probably just because.
That's totally fine. Yeah,
I'll try to
that's all
get them
good.
all done over the break.
Yeah, your plan was good. Yeah,
Sounds good. Thank you.
excellent.
I said I would adopt them.
What? You just send them to Brentwood? It's so expensive.
Have you seen a picture of the
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah. And